Hi, everyone. Welcome to Boosting Breakfast Participation in Grades 6 through 12, hosted by the Food Research and Action Center. I'm Steve Hayward, Communications Manager at FRAC. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, select Show Captions in the bottom taskbar and select English as the spoken language. At the end of the presentation, there will be time for questions and answers. To ask a question, please use the Q&A tab, also located in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Erin Heisem, Senior Child Nutrition Policy Analyst at FRAC.
Thanks, Steve, and hello, everybody. As Steve said, welcome to FRAC's Thursday webinar, Boosting Breakfast in Grades 6 through 12. My name is Erin Kennedy Heisem, and I'm a Senior Child Nutrition Policy Analyst here with FRAC. I'm so excited to be here today to explore all the various ways that schools and partners are increasing breakfast participation with our oldest students. So let's get started. Next slide, please. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with FRAC, we are a national nonprofit that works to end hunger in America through advocacy, research, and technical assistance. You can find out more about our work on our website at frac.org. Next slide. And here we go. We have a ton to cover today. I will start by setting the stage of school breakfast with a review of national data and some research. Next, we will hear how school nutrition professionals are increasing breakfast participation in secondary schools. Lauren Marlow will share what they are doing in Cincinnati, and Josh Perkins will discuss what he is doing to increase breakfast in Madison. Nicole Melia will discuss the steps Pennsylvania took to create a statewide school breakfast program and the impact of that program thus far. I'll come back and share some resources, and we will wrap up with a Q&A. As my colleague Steve said, please utilize the Q&A function on the bottom bar of your Zoom screen to submit questions at any point through the webinar. Next slide, please. I'm sure many of you on this webinar already know how important school breakfast is to growing students. Research indicates that eating school breakfast improves students' concentration, alertness, comprehension, memory, and standardized test scores. It also has numerous health benefits as well. It is associated with reduced food insecurity and better diet quality. And I believe a strong and supported breakfast program contributes to a school culture that says we care. When administrators, teachers, and staff embrace school breakfast, it tells students that the entire community supports their social, emotional, mental, and physical health. Next slide, please. So this slide depicts some data published in FRAC's report, The Reach of School Breakfast and Lunch. As you can see, the average daily participation in school breakfast increased in the 2021-2022 school year when all meals were offered to all students at no cost through the Seamless Summer Option waiver available during the pandemic. Next slide. Unfortunately, that participation dropped when schools returned to the tiered eligibility system of free, reduced price, and paid meals this past school year. This slide here depicts data that was collected from 91 large school districts nationwide for FRAC's annual large district report. Collectively, the surveyed districts experienced a 5% decrease in average daily breakfast participation in October 2022 compared to April 2022, serving over 100,000 fewer children breakfast each school day. Next slide, please. And we are also seeing the gap between breakfast and lunch participation return to pre-pandemic levels, indicating that the barriers that prevented students from participating in school breakfast prior to the pandemic have returned. And we will discuss some of those barriers in a minute. Next slide, please. A little more data for you, this time specifically looking at high schoolers. Every other year, the CDC surveys high school students through their Youth Risk Behavior Survey. Here you can see some of the relevant data points from the 2021 sample. In 2021, nearly 50% of surveyed high schoolers reported eating less than a serving a day of fruit or 100% fruit juice. And alarmingly, 75% of surveyed high schoolers reported not eating breakfast daily. That was up from 67% in 2019. And that marks a decade of declining daily breakfast consumption among high schoolers. Clearly, this is an issue. Next slide. So why aren't students eating? Adolescents, roughly 10 to 18, 19 years old, report skipping breakfast due to a lack of time, a lack of desire, a dislike of the foods offered, and unfortunately, they perceive it as a way to lose weight, despite evidence to the contrary. As I mentioned earlier, skipping breakfast is associated with poorer diet quality and lower rates of physical activity, both of which are linked to a higher BMI. There's also stigma surrounding breakfast participation. As we all know, we all experienced ourselves, adolescence is a time when our peers and our social status matter greatly. If it is not cool to eat school breakfast, adolescents might not want to do it. Timing and location matter greatly, as you will hear from our speakers today. Offering breakfast in the traditional setting where it is served in the cafeteria, away from the classrooms, away from lockers, when it's only offered before the start of the school day can be a major barrier to participation. And I also like to look at barriers from the operational perspective. So not only the barriers that the students face as they try to get breakfast, but also what food and nutrition services experience as they try to expand their breakfast program. A robust school breakfast program requires support from a variety of players within a school and district. It requires staff and food, both of which have been challenging to come by in recent years. Next slide, please. But we know that there are two main ingredients to a robust and thriving school breakfast program. First, offering breakfast to all students at no charge. And second, utilizing innovative service models that brings breakfast to where the students congregate and learn. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide because I know our presenters will elaborate and really share how these models work, both on the ground and in the kitchen. However, just to level set, when we say innovative or alternative breakfast models, we are usually referring to one of these three models. Breakfast in the classroom, where the meal is served directly in the homeroom or first period. Grab and go, where students can select meals from a cart or a kiosk and bring food into their classroom. And second chance, which is very popular among secondary students and allows for breakfast to be served after the start of the school day. Again, our speakers will go into greater detail on how these work in their districts. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to highlight this research that occurred because it occurred specifically in secondary schools. Project Breakfast, Fueling Academics and Strengthening Teens, was a 4-year study conducted nearly a decade ago, although the findings remain relevant today, as we saw from all the data. The project tested ways to increase breakfast participation at 16 rural Minnesota high schools. The study was conducted by the University of Minnesota in collaboration with partners and other organizations. The intervention formed a school breakfast team that was made up of students, school food service, administrators, teachers, and other key staff. This team came together to design and implement a grab-and-go breakfast outside the traditional cafeteria setting. They worked to change school policies, allowing students to eat breakfast in the hallway in the classroom. And they created a student-led marketing campaign that was conducted to encourage students to eat school breakfast. And what did the researchers find? Utilizing this grab-and-go model and creating this culture of school breakfast resulted in increased participation amongst high schoolers in the intervention schools. Students reported fewer barriers to participation, and they reported feeling more support to participating in school breakfast from both their teachers and the school staff, but also support from their peers. Students in the intervention schools consumed more fruit without altering their daily caloric intake nor affecting their BMI. And with the increased school breakfast participation, most schools were able to recoup startup costs within 1 month and make a profit on the school breakfast program. Next slide, please. All right, so let's get into it. Now we're going to hear from our experts on the ground, like I said, in the kitchens, in the schools themselves. First up, we have Lauren Marlow, Manager of Nutrition Services at Cincinnati Public Schools. Take it away, Lauren.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I'm going to discuss how Cincinnati Public Schools, we use quality improvement projects, QI projects, to help increase breakfast participation, specifically in secondary schools within our district, and a bunch of different strategies we use within QI to do that. And a little bit of background on Cincinnati Public Schools, we have 65 schools, 14 of those have high schoolers, and we have 36,000 students across the district enrolled. We can go to the next slide, please. And so in a district our size, it's important for everybody to have common goals and a message. And so here are the 5 pillars that our district operates under. So when the student dining team gets together and tries to develop goals for the year, we keep these all in mind and try to determine where student dining fits into these and where we can improve to increase the goals and to help the district to be successful in preparing students for life. So we know breakfast is important, and we look at participation data all the time, and we know that secondary breakfast is where we have room to grow, and we're not reaching as many students with that breakfast due to all the barriers that Aaron already talked about. I think every district sees those barriers, and so we come up with multiple strategies that we can use to try to break down those barriers and reach students and get them fed so that they're ready to learn in the classroom. And one of the things that we have been doing for about 10 years now is a universal breakfast. So breakfast has already been free for all students in all schools. So that's really helped break down that barrier of access, where every student has access to free breakfast when they come into school. So let's go to the next slide. So when we're looking at QI, we're trying to determine what actions we can do. Since we want to increase secondary breakfast, so we come up with a plan. And we came up with many different strategies, and we want to look at the data on, is that strategy working? Do we need to tweak it a little bit? What do we need to do to improve it? And then implement that change, and then evaluate that data again. And so we know that all improvement requires change, but not all change is improvement. And so if we don't see an improvement in participation, and that means we're not reaching students with breakfast, then it's time to start a new strategy. But we have, go ahead and go to the next slide. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And so some of the things that we learned from the pandemic, we're calling them silver linings, is that breakfast in the classroom can be a great strategy to reach specifically secondary students, because they might not get to school in time to go to the cafeteria, or the group of students that they hang out with aren't going to the cafeteria. And so we always knew that reaching students in the classroom with breakfast would be beneficial, but there was, in our district, I'm sure other districts see this too, there's pushback from school administration and facilities, and that there would be too much mess in the classroom. There would be bugs, and that students wouldn't be paying attention. And so with the pandemic, we were forced to feed kids outside of the cafeteria and throughout the building due to social distancing. And these barriers were taken down because they did not see the issues that they thought they would have. And so that's been a silver lining coming out of COVID, is it's kind of the norm now to do breakfast in the classroom and breakfast after the bell. So we're able to reach students in multiple areas. We'll serve breakfast in the cafeteria, and then we'll also have kiosks set up where during the breakfast period, they'll have the ability to get breakfast in multiple locations. So that's been a big positive, and we've seen increase in participation that way. We can go to the next slide, and here is an example of our breakfast kiosk. So marketing is also very important, and we want to make sure that the menu is visible for the students and that they can see all the items that are offered. And we did make some adjustments to the menu for secondary students. We used to have a K-12 breakfast menu where it was the same menu for all schools. And after surveying students, we realized that secondary students have some different preferences and tastes than elementary students. So we broke off the secondary breakfast menu into a separate menu and made it so that there are more choices for the kids, but that it stayed the same, because you have what the kids want. They want more choices, but you have to think about inventory control and staffing and labor in the morning and what's feasible to give kids what they want, but make it feasible for staff as well. So we went to a static menu where it was the majority, like 90% of the menu was the same every day, and we switched out one hot sandwich item every day, and that was on a weekly rotation. So we had like 10 options at breakfast for students, but it was static, so you were still controlling your inventory, and staff was able to prepare those items every day. Go to the next slide.
Lauren, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you don't mind projecting and leaning into your speaker a little bit, it seems that we can hear you better as you lean in and if you project a little bit.
Okay, I'll try. Can
Thank
you hear me
you.
better now? Okay, great. Some other things that we try to increase breakfast participation is doing a breakfast champions challenge. And we held a challenge throughout our 14 secondary schools and really marketed it and let the district know this was happening, worked with principals to know this was happening. But we looked at breakfast participation week to week, and whoever had the highest increase in breakfast participation won money for the student council at that school would get a check for $1,000, $2,000, or $3,000 to be able to use towards whatever they wanted to use it towards. They could get t-shirts, they could have a party, they could spend it at the end of the year, they could use it at prom to do some like special things at prom. So it incentivized the students to come and eat breakfast, and it got the administration getting students to eat and just students getting students to eat, so that you were breaking down that barrier of stigma of not wanting to eat school breakfast. So we did see increase in participation with that, and that was grant funded, and that was a great initiative that we hope to also take on and use this coming up year as well. We also use social media. You'll see that clip, the graphic on the right is what we use to post on social media, and just reminding families that breakfast is free for all students, because you're constantly having new families in the district and they might not be aware of that. And even though we've had universal free breakfast for 10 years, it's a constant reminder on social media that that is available for all students, and there is no stigma around free breakfast because it's for all students. And I'll go to the next slide. As part of our QI project, we're always looking at data. So you want to benchmark with participation data in the past and then see where you are now. And if you're doing an initiative and you don't see an increase in participation, we would quickly pivot and determine what other initiative that we can do to try to get that, reach students and get that participation increased. And we're working on trying to get more student voice, and sometimes it's hard to reach students and to hear what barriers there are for breakfast, but working with your school administration to become part of any leadership groups that they already have. Last year, we worked with the superintendent, and she was already gathering a group of student leaders in high schools. And so we piggybacked onto that meeting and had like a food show for them where we tested some new items, and then we got their feedback, direct feedback from them as they were testing the new items. And that we found really beneficial. And we also use QR codes that we post in the cafeteria. And so they can use their phone to scan the QR code and give us direct feedback right there too. And that's sometimes a little more candid feedback because they don't have to speak to you face to face. So we found using QR codes to be really helpful to get student feedback directly when we're testing new items, or even getting feedback on customer service related issues, or what barriers they have to why they don't eat or why they do eat with the cafeteria, so we can share that and improve operations across the district too. The next slide. So we're always looking for grants and for partners who can help us with these initiatives. I know you can only use USDA funds for certain costs. So for like the Breakfast Champion Challenge, we had the No Kid Hungry grant that helped us fund that. So it's searching and developing partnerships and collaborations with other groups who have the same mission as you, and they might be able to help fund these initiatives to reach students and to help nourish them and bridge that gap. So that's all I have. I don't know if there's questions in the chat.
All right, there was one question, or there's a few questions that came in about the funding for your Champions grant. Did you say that was just through No Kid Hungry?
Yes, that was No Kid Hungry grant, correct.
Did that one. All right. Thank you, Lauren, so much. That was really, really interesting. I really love how you engage the students with the QR codes and particularly using the QI quality improvement systems. Next up, we have Josh Perkins from Madison Metropolitan School District sharing how he runs Second Chance in his high schools. Take it away, Josh.
Thanks, Aaron. Test 1, 2. Is everything coming through okay? I'm trying to lean in. I want to just start out by saying to Lauren, great job, Lauren. I echo so much of what was said in her presentation. These challenges really are universal when it comes to trying to get breakfast in front of kids who are extremely busy. I think as a general observation, this grade level is probably the most prone to being in a hurry when they come in the doors of school. As I'll describe, one of the challenges in Madison Metro is that we've only had a pilot, which is I'm going to present and describe in a moment, with mobile service points. This is a huge point that I think whatever time of day it is that you're trying to increase participation during, getting out of the servery and offering added convenience to students seems to be the key, the common theme linking all this. So this slide describes really more of what I'm going to talk about in the presentation than Second Chance. Second Chance is something that we did just prior to the pandemic in Madison, a strictly speaking Second Chance breakfast. And if you could advance the slide, I'll just kind of detail and maybe describe a little bit of the difference between what we had done. I'll talk about the results and then what we did do this year. Second Chance, of course, this is a basic definition. And it follows what we had done in the district just prior to COVID, which is especially for those students who enter school in a hurry, whatever reason, their schedule is too busy to make a special trip to a dedicated service venue, your cafeteria, wherever it is that you're offering those meals and traditionally did. They're able to find a convenient way to have breakfast where it works for them. And in my past life outside of Madison, would typically look for the places where students either like to socially gather or where traffic in their school, in the course of doing business in their school, they took them anyway. So it really is just rather than building something and saying, I'm going to be able to bring students to me where it works for me, you're reversing that and saying, looking at students and saying the timing and the place that works best for them is where you're going to get the best success offering meals, including and maybe especially breakfast. So for me, Second Chance is you can do a couple of things, but this in this most basic format just refers to a student who's entered school, probably had a class period and realizes they didn't either get enough breakfast or didn't eat breakfast at all and has a lot of time left before they have another chance to get a meal and they have a lot of attention they need to pay to their studies. So a couple of reasons here. A lot of people aren't, including adults, they're not hungry first thing in the morning. They may be rushed when they come into school, need all the rest they can. I know my teenager does. Or lastly, and this is really plays into what we did this year, there may be some stigma associated with being that person who has to kind of identify themselves by walking to that cafeteria. Next slide, please. So what it looks like for us, as Lauren and Aaron both described, you have to work with the school, you have to work with your stakeholders to make sure that there are a lot of factors that determine whether or not a mobile breakfast point or seemingly interrupting other business that's going on during the day will be supported. I highly recommend, developing a strong relationship with those principals and schools that you want to roll something like this out in ahead of time, hearing their concerns, explaining your plan, demonstrating flexibility. For us, it looked a particular way depending on some of those factors this year, and I can describe a little bit about that in a moment. As Lauren described the menu, and I really echo that too. Breakfast, I think, is not a time when a lot of people are looking for surprises. They're looking for something dependable. Oftentimes it's consumed in a hurry, and it's pretty high stakes meal. The consequences of not having a breakfast, I think, can be really high for people's feeling of well-being as the day progresses. And so you can have a pretty static menu that's easy for your staff to execute and predictable, and still make it a really appealing choice for students. Classroom, custodial partnerships, those are also really important, because I agree. Every time that I've been involved in either breakfast in the classroom or program, there's a lot of concerns about cleanliness. Once it all happens, people tend to respond by saying, it was nothing like the trouble I expected. I wish we'd done this years earlier. So that's just something, hopefully to allay some concerns. Next slide, please. So successful outcomes, Aaron described these. I won't belabor this. Talked a little bit about the outcomes that are for students' well-being, their mood during school, their ability to focus on classes, behavioral aspects. That's something I've heard a lot of school leadership, school administrators, teachers talk about, the almost immediate impacts that they will see on how students are just conducting themselves interpersonally, how they're able to be in the classroom, and of course, stronger attendance and graduation rates. These are all incredibly important factors for school administrators. And I think that's a great place to start when you're talking about wanting to pitch this program. Next slide, please. So for us, we're talking about La Follette High School. It's very close to my offices, which is convenient. Just prior to COVID, they took on the challenge of offering a true second chance breakfast, and we actually ended up offering a second chance lunch during that time because it was so successful. And I'll detail that with some data in the next couple of slides. That was our pilot program. And I've been a year in the district now, and it's obvious to me anecdotally that that was ripe for cross-pollination with other high schools had COVID not hit and had the impact on all of our businesses that it did. But it was a great pilot story to look back on and still refer to now as we kind of thaw out operations. Next slide, please. We'll talk about a little bit of data here. So here this is measured year over year, and it does actually include, we had really good success with rising participation, even though this was in the year when COVID really took things over in the spring. So you can see here, we're talking about breakfast in this webinar, and so I won't hit too heavily on lunch, but you can see in this slide that the awareness of an access point did spread over to lunch. We did offer, I didn't take photos of what we were doing, but it's very similar to the cart that Lauren had the photo of. What we did this year was something a little bit more dressed up. We decided to spend down some of our fund balance on a cart that has hot and cold holding. It's a really nice presentation. It does cost a little bit more, but I think we're going to find it to be worth it over the long run. So you can see here, we picked up about just over 100, an average of 100 breakfast counts a day, pretty consistently year over year. And then if we can go to the next slide. So you see 68% increase at breakfast, 13% increase at lunch. I think that probably reflects the fact that the survey offered a lot more options at lunch than at breakfast, even though we did have a very strong program this year in the survey for breakfast. So next slide, please. We'll talk about what happened this year. This year, we were trying to reboot the program. We went out there to administrators, teachers, principals who all were really affected by COVID, just like food nutrition, and said, look, we coming off of, Aaron discussed this right at the top, we saw breakfast counts, we saw all meal counts take a dip year over year after those SSO waivers lapsed and everything went back to standard. And we knew we really needed to dig in and basically make up some lost ground. So we took those new carts. We use Cadco carts. A number of manufacturers offer this style of cart that's either plug-in or has room for hot and cold holding below and merchandising on a shelf above the top. A lot of those templates stay the same. So we rolled that out just inside the entryway. What we did this year was not a true second chance offering. With the school schedule the way it was, this is what we were able to work out with school leadership. We just said, can we just park it inside the entry doors? And that's all we want to do, and offer a grab and go menu. It was very standard. So we again saw a huge increase. Basically, we had an average of about 75 to 80, immediately jumped to 109 the first day of service, and a couple of days later, we rose to 136, and it stabilized at around 145. As I note here, we have more ground to gain, because we're working with principals this year on actually incorporating not only an entryway program that offers a lot of convenience, and I think really decreases the possibilities for stigma, because everybody has to come in the front door. If you're gathering in a group in the front door, that's a very communal activity. There's no self-identification with your eligibility or who you are and why you're using the program. It's just a cool thing you can grab on your way in the door. And I think that's really affected how students feel about the program too. Next slide, please. Just one last hit here. Stakeholders and groups. I can't speak loudly enough to offering support and training, or the ability to be flexible to all of these groups. Lauren talked about some great student engagement efforts. That's work that lies before us in Madison. That's incredibly important. I don't find that I can do much without buy-in from my principals, so I usually start there, and they often have a great avenue towards the best ways to communicate with students as well. I'm part of a building services team, so it's very convenient for me to partner up with my custodial team and say, do you have concerns? What can I do to work around them before we roll out things that might increase your burden? That really helps your program perpetuate. I find it's not difficult to get our staff to be excited about it or to execute on our side. It really is the whole team on the side of executing building services in the schools. Once they're all bought in, it's a great program, and I think that's reflected in everybody's opinion of it. And that's it from me. I see one question here: how to get your maintenance director on board. That's a great question. I'm not. I think what I do is try to maybe connect them with peers. If you have a successful pilot program, for example, even within your state, and maybe connect somebody in a counterpart in another district who can discuss how they tackled it. The problems can be tackled. That's proven, that's for sure. It's just a matter of seeing a successful model.
Thanks, Josh. I really can't agree more with the importance of getting the whole team involved in making these decisions. And Stephanie, thank you for the question regarding maintenance. It can definitely be tricky as a selling point. I agree with Josh's comment on really that peer-to-peer learning. If you do have anybody in a neighboring district that is successfully doing this, trying to see what their maintenance department thinks and what they've kind of gone through and the lessons learned and from their experience, as well as like what are the specific concerns that they're facing and how can we maybe find solutions to those specific concerns. And we are happy to brainstorm anyway. If you want to reach out after the webinar, we can kind of put you in touch with some other food service directors and we can work through some problems together. So next up, we have Nicole Melia. Nicole wears two hats. She is the Food and Nutrition Services Supervisor from Great Valley School District in Pennsylvania, but she is also here today as the School Nutrition Association of Pennsylvania's Public Policy and Legislative Chair, and she's here to talk about how they got a Healthy Breakfast for All program in the state. So Nicole, you're up.
Thank you, Erin, and wonderful job, everybody. Those are some really awesome programs that are going on, and I know there's so many fabulous programs going on across the country to expand breakfast for students, especially on the secondary level. You can go to the next slide, please. So in 2022, when it was really very clear on a federal level that the waivers that were available during the pandemic that allowed schools to provide meals free of charge under the seamless summer option were going to be going away. The Pennsylvania School Nutrition Association, we really stepped up and formed the PA Meals for All Task Force. Our end goal really is and continues to be, we'll continue to work towards this, is a permanent state level policy for healthy school meals for all Pennsylvania. We're really looking at doing this through an incremental change, looking at like getting breakfast and then removal of the reduced price category for students or their charge for their reduced price meals, increasing statewide reimbursement with the eventual goal of getting lunch supported through state funding. Currently, we have about 20 coalition partners for our task force, FRAC being one of them. So we're very grateful for that. At the end of May, we launched a school board resolution, sample resolution template. And so far, I mean, it was right at the end of school, but we have 21 school boards that signed on to that already. If you can go to the next slide, please. So the backstory for Breakfast for All in Pennsylvania, it really was last summer around this time. We were really working very hard to talk to as many contacts in Harrisburg, our state capital, to tell the story of what we envisioned it looking like when we went back to paid, free, and reduced categories for lunch. We were very concerned. We were going into another school year with a huge unknown. And I remember the First Lady's office was really the office that took up our charge, and she was very supportive of anti-hunger actions, specifically around students. Governor Wolf had always been very supportive of breakfast programs in Pennsylvania. So we were working with the First Lady's office and we were having conversations, and I remember them saying, you know, supporting breakfast and lunch just seems like such a big ask. The dollar amount is just too much. And I remember saying, you know, if you could just do breakfast, it would go a long way in just ensuring every student comes into school knowing they can have something to eat. And it was like a light bulb went off and they said, oh, you're right. Breakfast really is important. And that might be fundable. So in 2022, October 2022, they announced, and breakfast was free for all all students in Pennsylvania. And it was supported through Esther's funds related to the pandemic, and it covered breakfast for all students. Now in 2023, Governor Shapiro did put breakfast in his budget, covering breakfast for all students. And he also added in the removal of the reduced price charge to students. So we were incredibly excited about this, and so excited to see the continued support of the administration for breakfast for our students. Currently, it is a fiscal note, so it is something that needs to be added to the budget every year. However, our main advocacy goal right now and moving into this school year is to really get that added into the school code, so that students in Pennsylvania will forever have breakfast free of charge, and reduced eligible students would receive breakfast and lunch free of charge. So that's really what we're working towards right now. We do also have healthy school meals for all legislation in the Senate and House. And so we're on our way as we look at this tiered approach and expanding our the support for meals and expanding access to meals in Pennsylvania. We're working on it and we're on our way. If you can go to the next slide, please. So I will say this is very preliminary data. Because of where we are and when schools can file claims, they have 60 days to file a claim. So this really is looking at March from 2018 in comparison with March of 2022 and 2023. When they implemented free breakfast for all students, the regular school breakfast program increased by 154% statewide. severe need breakfast. So certain schools will qualify for severe need. A lot of times, schools that are already under community eligibility provision are severe need, or schools that have a high free and reduced eligibility percentage are qualifying for severe need. So we did see a increase in breakfast participation in the severe need breakfast as well. Significantly, and what I've been looking for when I'm looking at the research is, how did this impact the students that already qualify to get free or reduced price breakfast? So overall, K through 12, we saw an 11% increase in students who were already eligible for free or reduced price breakfast. At the severe needs schools, we saw that an 8% increase. So there was benefit for those free and reduced eligible students when breakfast was free for all. And I think you can attribute a lot of that to the removal of the stigma. Schools are making it easier to access. And, you know, if your friends are going into the same location, you can get your breakfast and go from there. It's also important to note that in Pennsylvania, our free eligibility across the state increased by 6%. So we went from 54% of our students enrolled in National School Lunch Program schools to 60% of our students enrolled in National School Lunch Program schools are eligible for free meals. That is a significant number. It's over half of our students. So when you look at that and you look at the eligibility for what it takes to qualify for free meals at about $39,000 for a family of 4, you know, people are struggling above that. So that increase of breakfast didn't really surprise us. If you can go to the next slide. This is the slide that I think when I was calculating this data, and I will again say, this is Nicole Melia calculating data off of the statewide data that's available. This is very preliminary because we can't get an entire year to year. I kind of pulled the best data that we possibly could. But you can see that when breakfast was free for all students statewide at the secondary level, so this was 6 through 12, 58%, or for regular breakfast, it increased 58% across the board. But significantly, we saw a 28% increase in our free and reduced eligibility participation. And I think that is huge. And it really speaks to that removal of the stigma, ease of access. And when you're looking at the high school students, it just became part of the school day to go get breakfast. So students didn't feel singled out. In Pennsylvania, we had a lot of school bus shortages. And because breakfast was free, we were seeing schools roll out second chance breakfast, breakfast after the bell, grab and go. And I think that that all attributed to some of these increases as well. You can go to the next slide. So one of the questions FRAC asked me was to kind of share how other states who might be interested in doing a program like this or building advocacy for school meals, what that would look like. So the best thing I can say is insert yourself into conversations that are going on already within your state at food policy councils, child nutrition advocacy groups, food bank groups, agricultural groups, your farm to school network, your school nutrition association. Start to reach out to those individuals and get school meals as an agenda item. The more it can be talked about, the more support there might be, and the more likely somebody is going to take it up as an advocacy agenda item. As school nutrition professionals, I'm not sure what the difference between what the demographic of all of our participations truly are. But as school nutrition professionals, we are the experts in school meals. So it's so important to tell your story and invite your legislators into your cafeterias, set up legislator meetings to go meet them where they are. We've participated in education sessions where we've done webinars and invited legislators' staff to come and listen to us talk about the importance of school meals, just to educate them on what is truly happening every day. Getting the school board resolution set up was really impactful to start developing those conversations at a local level. We also have petitions. So this is a screenshot of our website, but you can go onto our website and there's an area to click to support and let us know that you support free school meals, healthy school meals for all students. And we use that as a talking point as well to say, hey, look at how many people truly want this. Look at how many organizations have signed on to our coalition. Lastly, if you can find funding, that is always important. I will say, SNAPA, the School Nutrition Association of Pennsylvania, has been able to do this with very little funding. So it is possible to build this momentum with not a lot of funding and really grassroots efforts, although funding is always nice, right? So that's a little bit about what's going on in Pennsylvania. We are so excited that Breakfast for All Students is continuing into the 23-24 school year. That was one of the best pieces of news that I got last week. So if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. There was one question that came in through the chat. Could you provide more information about how you increase the free reduced lunch percentage with the inclusion of the universal free breakfast?
So we did not increase the free and reduced lunch percentage because of universal free breakfast. It just happened. It just was the changing demographic of Pennsylvania that more students became eligible for free or reduced price meals. Just because of the challenges I think that our state is experiencing coming out of the pandemic and all of that.
Okay, great. All right, thank you so much. We're gonna go through some resources and wrap up with Q&A at the end as well. So here is a link to the FRAC Breakfast website. You can access all of our programs, all of our resources through this link. Next slide, please. And our website contains a variety of tips and tools that can help increase participation in the school breakfast program. The research we mentioned at the beginning of this webinar is housed on that site, as well as numerous resources on the benefits of the school breakfast program, expansion strategies, reimbursement, and operating the program in specific communities, such as rural communities. We also have a variety of resources that I've highlighted here on this slide, specifically looking at breakfast participation in secondary schools. Next slide, please. So on this screen are the recommendations that FRAC gathered by interviewing secondary school principals on their experiences starting a Breakfast After the Bell program. So I believe a question came through the chat on what we are doing to engage principals. And here's one of the ways that we've engaged principals in the past and continue to do so. These strategies are found in the resource titled Building a Better Breakfast Program, a guide for secondary school principals, available on our website. The first recommendation is to make a compelling case to the principal, really around why school breakfast is so important to older students, providing data on participation, food insecurity, test scores, student health, whatever is relevant to your school or district or community. The principal can then take that data and they can go on and be your advocate to make the case to the larger school body. Next, you'll want to identify school breakfast allies, and I think we've heard this from our presenters today. Anyone who will help you cultivate overall staff buy-in. Like we saw in Project Breakfast, the research, you want to create a school breakfast team to be your advocates and to help you work through all of the pieces of rolling out a breakfast after the bell program. Then you want to establish a clear plan that includes logistics for the entire project and for those who will be involved in executing it. And as always, communication is imperative to success. Keeping an open channel of communication where you can gather feedback and hear criticisms is key to making sure that everyone involved remains supportive of the program. Lastly, be flexible. The pandemic, as difficult and heartbreaking as it was, it showed us how resilient and innovative we can be, particularly in school food service. Keep that level of flexibility with you as you develop your breakfast programs and policies. So let's take it to the next slide. All right, so we have the Q&A feature. I know we've been doing some of them throughout. There is a comment in here about FRAC spending resources on encouraging and training reluctant principals, administrators, food service directors. So this is part of that. Some of the resources that I've shared that look specifically at secondary school principals. We've also collaborated with teachers unions, principal associations, superintendent associations, whatever we can do to really get the message out about the importance of school breakfast and how to increase breakfast participation through alternative models. The comment goes on to talk about increasing reimbursement for schools that do alternative models, such as grab and go, breakfast in the classroom. And there is a number of state legislation policies. I know in Maryland, they have Maryland Meals for Achievement, which does just that. It gives additional state funding for schools that participate in a breakfast in the classroom or an innovative breakfast model. There is comments about universal feeding. We at FRAC do advocate for healthy school meals for all students, and they talk about eliminating barriers to other programs. Again, we believe in streamlining the summer meals program and the CACFP after school at risk program to make it easier to operate, to make it easier for families. We recommend increases to meal reimbursement. If you read the large district report that we just released in June, we talk about various pieces of legislation where we advocate to increase the CEP multiplier, which would increase the reimbursement rate for schools. We advocate to increase the per meal reimbursement for breakfast and lunch to help schools operate in a more financially viable manner, and a variety of other things that we do that really help to increase access. I think I just answered all of those. And if there are any other questions, let me see. Chat here. So Lauren or Josh, who is in charge of point of service when you are doing alternative breakfast models in your high school? Is that with you in food services, or are you doing that with the teachers?
That is at CPS, it is student dining who's in charge of the POS. We do not have teachers passing out meals.
Same for us.
Okay, great. And are you guys doing CEP schools, or are you non-CEP schools with your second chance or your grab and go?
We do them at CEP and non-CEP, so all schools.
We had 16 CEP schools, but have not rolled out at the CEP schools with mobile, just high schools.
So Lauren, do you see a difference in your alternative breakfast operations in your CEP schools versus your non-CEP schools?
Yes, we typically have higher participation in our CEP schools than non-CEP schools. So those schools have like different barriers to why the kids are not eating there. But like second chance breakfast is more successful in our non-CEP schools because the students, if they may have ate before they came, but it might have been like a sugary filled breakfast, so they're hungry if in an hour or two, and so that's where the second chance breakfast can come into play. But that's where it comes into seeing what's working at certain schools and talking to the school specifically to see what barriers they see to initiatives and tailoring it to those schools' needs too.
Great. Okay. And we have one more question, Nicole. Now that you have a statewide breakfast program, what do you think needs to happen to maintain high levels of breakfast participation?
Well, one of the things that Pennsylvania does have is the is a tier. If your breakfast participation is over 20%, you actually get an additional 2 cents for lunch reimbursement from the state. So there is motivation for those that are financially motivated to increase your breakfast participation. But I think as schools, as we start to see that breakfast is hopefully going to continue to be permanent for all students in Pennsylvania, schools are going to be able to feel comfortable to invest in equipment or the space and the time it takes to really roll out some of these breakfast in the classroom, we call it breakfast after the bell in Pennsylvania. So the second chance breakfast. So I think as we're rolling into that second year, people are having more and more ideas on how to increase that, especially as you're seeing it continue. So yeah, I think just getting it permanent is really going to help people to roll those programs out to increase participation. I also will say I think once we hit October, the state really will be able to have some finalized data on the outcomes of free breakfast for all. And I think once that data comes out, especially looking at the impacts preliminary on secondary level and those that are really eligible for free breakfast, I think that's really going to carry some impact on schools rolling out. It's going to influence principals and administration to really roll out more expanded breakfast programs.
Great. Thank you so much. Well, I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. Just want to say thank you to our participants for an excellent webinar today. Next slide, please. You can reach out to us at FRAC here, discuss any of our priorities. We'll be happy to chat with you. And we want to thank you, all of our presenters again, and have a wonderful day. Thank you so much.